Lewis Faculty Scholar in Entrepreneurship and Free Enterprise here at the Lewis Honors College at the University of Kentucky. I'm also a proud faculty affiliate with the Study for the Institute of Free Enterprise at our Gatton College of Business and Economics. We are very honored to have A'Lelia share her own remarkable journey as an author, journalist, truth teller, and of course, give us a closer look at the legacy of her great-great-grandmother, the one and only Madam C.J. Walker. Our students will formally introduce A'Lelia shortly, but we want to give you a greater context of what this event is really about. First and foremost, can you imagine the type of economic system in which Madam C.J. Walker had to navigate and compete in as part of the first generation post-slavery? Madam C.J. Walker is listed in the Guinness Book of World Records as the first self-made American woman millionaire. Now we know that John D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, and Jay Gould and many other white men were millionaires long before Madam Walker. As a matter of fact, many of their wives and daughters were millionaires through inheritance, long before Madam Walker too. So the distinction is on self-made American female millionaire. Our intention tonight is simple. We seek to explore the intersection of free enterprise and racial inequality. And so we are inspired by the stories and triumph of Madam C.J. Walker and Miss A'Lelia Bundles too, because that gives us all cause to hope, to move mountains, swim seas, and build a more beloved and inclusive community together. Now, A'Lelia's visit also coincides with a few other things. We're going to be teaching a new course here in the Lewis Honors College entitled Black Wall Street, The Color and Culture of Capitalism. We're going to also be doing research with the local community involving a socio-economic impact case study, examining the effect of COVID-19 on African-American and other marginalized communities in this region. We're also going to be working with our students to create student-led and student-centered programming to where they can create several platforms to bring people together, to embrace entrepreneurial mindsets, and curate courageous conversations across campus and within the community. Before I turn the program over to our student co-host, I want you to hear from the following individuals who made this event possible. In this order, you will hear from Dr. Charles Cordomanchi, Dr. Laura Bryan, and Dr. Laura Tuttle.
All right, well, thank you, Patrick. I am Chuck Cordomanch, Director of the Institute for the Study of Free Enterprise, or ISFE, and Associate Professor in the Economics Department here at UK. And we're excited to sponsor and be a co-host of this event. And Ms. Bundles, want to welcome you, first of all, to UK's virtual campus. While we wish we could have had the opportunity to meet you in person, we're delighted that you could join us one way or another. And I want to take this time to thank the Lewis Honors College, the Martin Luther King Center, for partnering with us on this event. And special thanks go to Patrick and his team of students at No Limits Productions, Lewis Communications Director Megan Arell, and ISFE's Administrative Assistant Kelsey Drury. They're really the ones who put in the legwork to bring this event to life. And I also want to acknowledge ISFE's major donors, Joseph W. Kraft III and Charles Koch Foundations. And for those unfamiliar with the Institute, our mission is to generate intellectually rigorous research and an open dialogue to discover and understand how free enterprise affects people's lives and the well-being of society. Public events like these, although they've moved to an online format for now, are a critical component of fulfilling that mission. And so I'd like to just close by thanking all of you for coming, and I'll now turn it over to Dr. Bryan.
You're muted, Dr. Bryan.
Okay. Thank you. Good evening and welcome to the Lewis Honors College. I am the acting dean, and it is a great pleasure to welcome all of you for this evening's event. I am grateful for all of our partners, which I won't name right now, but I do want to say I'm especially grateful to Patrick Walker. His voice and his initiatives are amazing and very significant to the Honors College and to UK as a whole. I'm especially pleased with Ms. Bundle's participation in our event tonight. For those of you who are not familiar with the Honors College, our mission is to better the Commonwealth and the world through the preparation of our students to discover their purpose, to develop intellectually, and to lead with integrity. And I can't think of any better person who can help us fulfill that mission with our speaker tonight. Our vision is to be a world-class honors college. And again, it's through these events with esteemed colleagues like Ms. Bundles that we can fulfill our mission and vision. So thank you so much for being with us. And I want to thank all of you for joining us. I know there's lots of options these days for virtual events, and it's very meaningful that you have chosen to participate in our event tonight. Thank you and welcome again.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bryan, Dean Bryan, and thank you, Dr. Walker, for bringing our distinguished guest, Ms. Alelia Bundles, to us tonight. Lewis Honors College continues to benefit from your indefatigable efforts to serve our students and to establish inclusive campus partnerships. The events we choose to co-sponsor align with the core values of Lewis Honors College, which emphasize social responsibility, diversity and inclusion, community, mutual respect, and human dignity. We acknowledge that diversity is not enough, that inclusion is crucial for a just community. Inclusion refers to an environment in which all individuals are treated fairly and respectfully, have equal access to opportunities and resources, can contribute to and benefit from a place they feel welcome and like they belong. And this requires a willingness to listen to and enter into frank dialogues like the one we are having tonight, and a willingness to abandon old ways of doing things that perpetuate structural inequities. Lewis Honors College is committed to this. We are locking arms with the university leadership in efforts to create a community of belonging at the University of Kentucky, in which all of our students, faculty, and staff are affirmed for their identities and acknowledged for their valuable contributions. A community in which we are committed to correcting the gaps in our knowledges and to affirming the contributions made by Black Americans and Black women in particular to the building of our nation and our Commonwealth. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And thanks again to Dr. Patrick Walker for making this happen.
And thank you, Tara, and everyone. Now, Alelia will be taking questions toward the end of the program. And as Megan has mentioned, you may submit them through the Q&A feature on your computer screens. Again, use the Q&A feature to submit any questions throughout the program. If you're interested in supporting and partnering with us on any of these initiatives, please send me an email. It's real simple, patrick@uky.edu. Now we're going to hear briefly from our student. We're going to start with Trevor Payne. Trevor is a junior pre-finance major from Owensboro, Kentucky. And he's going to talk about No Limit Productions.
Hi, thank you, Dr. Walker. I'd like to once again welcome everybody to the event. We're all honored and graced by the presence of Ms. Bundles, and we're very appreciative of her time. As you've probably noticed, we're in unprecedented times, and we all recognize that complex problems require complex answers. However, in order to confront the issues facing our community, our Commonwealth, and our country, the answer is somewhat simpler than it may seem. Collaboration, entrepreneurship, and entrepreneurial mindsets are the key to overcoming obstacles and creating meaningful and impactful change that will be equitable for all. America is founded with an entrepreneurial mindset, and through it, we will grow and persevere. I'm here as a representative of No Limits Productions, and we're a student group dedicated to providing platforms on which entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial learning will prosper and thrive. We want to take part in the change we want to see, and No Limits Productions will be our route in doing so. We will help in the production of podcasts, events, and various other platforms that will explore entrepreneurial ideals and how we can utilize them to have courageous conversations that will invoke meaningful change and mutual understanding. We'll have more details out soon on how to sign up to join NLP, but I'd now like to take this opportunity to introduce my friends, Trace Williams, Sabria Cohen, Javid Fadi, Amy Cataldo, Faith Thibodeau, Dayron Shavers, Michael Morgan, and Bryce Grant.
Thank you for that, Trevor. And you know, it's really the students who are really giving us hope as they sojourn through a national global pandemic, attempt to stay focused with their studies. And so really, we want to honor our student panelists tonight. Now we come to a very special part of the program where we want you to know that this entire event is dedicated in loving memory of Miss Breonna Taylor. Breonna attended classes here at the University of Kentucky. Breonna became an EMT, putting her own life at risk to save others. Breonna Taylor's life matters. Breonna Taylor's life matters. Our students have prepared a special tribute in her honor. This video was produced by Trace Williams, a senior media arts and studies major from Lexington, and he's also the No Limit Productions media director. After the tribute, our ladies will immediately begin to introduce our speaker, Ms. Lilia Bundles, and following that, before that, there will also be a poem from Ms. Sabria Cowan. So they're putting me to work now. I've got to do something to share the screen. And I'm going to share the screen right now and pray to God that this works. Thank you for that beautiful tribute. We will now, before the students introduce our speaker, we wanted you to get this, really hear this video that will give you, again, some of the greatest significance of why we have Miss Bundles with us here tonight. And so again, they're putting me to work for this. I'm going to share my screen again and submit this very important piece that you may not be familiar with. I'm going to send the students a bill.
The cosmetics industry is worth $62 billion a year in the US alone. But few people know the incredible true story of one of its pioneers, a child of slaves, who becomes the first female African-American millionaire. But that fortune is a long way off in 1887. An uneducated single parent, Sarah keeps a roof over their heads by taking in other people's washing.
There was no indoor plumbing, there was no electricity. People really didn't bathe very often.
Exhaustion and the unhygienic conditions soon take its toll on Sarah.
Within a few years, her hair began to fall out. She had really horrible scalp disease, really horrible dandruff because she wasn't cleaning her scalp regularly.
In her role as a washerwoman, Sarah has come into contact with many types of cleansing agents. So she starts mixing them, hoping to find a cure for her hair loss.
So what she did was to experiment with an ointment that had petrolatum, which is like Vaseline. It had sulfur, which healed the sores on her scalp. And she put a little perfume in it so it wouldn't smell so bad.
When she applies it, something incredible happens. Her hair begins to grow back.
She became her own walking advertisement. And when other women saw what had happened with her and they saw that now she had hair, then they wanted to know what she was using.
Using the small amount of money she saved, she starts bottling and selling her lotion.
She began to travel throughout the southern United States and the eastern United States, mostly to the towns and cities where there was a church. She was going after African American women. And because they were urban, they were beginning to care more about their clothing and about their presentation. She knew that this market was untapped. She would go to their houses and say, I'll be happy to do a treatment for you for free if you buy the product from me for 10 cents.
It's a winning strategy. Soon, C.J. Walker has a team of saleswomen going door to door.
The Wonderful Hair Grower was the top seller because women thought it would grow their hair. Well, really what it would do was heal their scalp so their hair would grow.
By 1910, C.J. Walker has a growing business. For the first time, she and her daughter can enjoy luxuries. And she has a vision of what she must do next. Racism in America is still rife. Between 1900 and 1914, hundreds of African Americans are murdered. So C.J. Walker decides to use her wealth to bankroll change.
She became very involved in the NAACP. She would meet with the leadership of the NAACP and they would talk to her about their anti-lynching campaign. They would talk to her about voting rights and the kinds of things that they were interested in. And so she began to see herself on a larger stage.
Her fortune pays for campaigns and provides scholarships for promising African American students.
She was a woman who had used her money to try to make a difference in the world.
In 1919, Madam Walker dies suddenly from kidney failure. She's 51. She leaves a fortune of over $1 million and a sales force of over 20,000 agents, generating revenues equivalent to tens of millions of dollars today.
When Madam Walker died, it was almost as if the reaction to Mandela. People lined up all along Broadway in Irvington, New York, just to get a glimpse of the casket.
And now we're going to hear a short poem from Sabria Cowan and finally hear from our speaker, Miss A'Lelia Bundles.
Good evening, everyone. I want to start us off with a poem today entitled Still I Rise by Maya Angelou. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may try me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I'll rise. Does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? 'Cause I walk like I've got oil wells pumping in my living room. Just like moons and like suns, with the certainty of tides, just like hope springing high, still, I'll rise. Did you want to see me broken, bowed head and lowered eyes, shoulders falling down like teardrops, weakened by my soulful cries? Does my haughtiness offend you? Don't you take it awful hard, 'cause I laugh like I've got gold mines digging in my own backyard. You may shoot me with your words, you may cut me with your eyes, you may kill me with your hatefulness, but still, like air, I'll rise. Does my sexiness upset you? Does it come as a surprise that I dance like I've got diamonds at the meeting of my thighs? Of the huts of history's shame, I rise. Up from a past that's rooted in pain, I rise. I'm a black ocean leaping and wide, welling and swelling, I bear in the tide. Leaving behind nights of terror and fear, I rise. Into a daybreak that's wondrously clear, I rise, bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave. I am the dream and the hope of the slave. I rise, I rise, I rise. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabria.
Thank you, Sabria, for sharing that wonderful poem. Without further ado, it is my honor to introduce our speaker tonight. She is a two-time Emmy Award winner, a multi-award winning journalist and author, and she is the founder of the Madam Walker Family Archives. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Miss Aaliyah Bundles.
Amy, thank you very much. And Sabria, thank you for reading that poem. We can never hear Maya Angelou too many times. Dr. Walker, thank you for inviting me. It is really such a pleasure to be able to join, especially the students. I was a student, I have to say I was a freshman in college 50 years ago, which seems incredible. I can't possibly be that old, but it just reminds me of all of the possibilities that all of you are living every day, even in the midst of this pandemic. I know that you are there coming up with great solutions to some of the problems that society is presenting to us. And some of the things that my generation was facing, you are still facing. But I loved hearing what Trevor said about collaboration. All of you working together on No Limits and in your classes and coming up with solutions. It's really about these partnerships and these friendships that you create at this stage in your life that I think will carry you forward and that will let you know about respect and true affection for each other. I grew up the road from you guys in Indianapolis. So we are state neighbors with big rivalries in basketball. And so whenever I see Indiana and Kentucky playing, I pay a lot of attention. But I also have roots in Kentucky. My father's family came from Horse Cave, Kentucky. And I was telling students earlier today, I have never visited Horse Cave. This was supposed to be my year of bucket list travel, but I am not going anywhere right now, but it will be on my list. And I do hope to be able to come to Lexington maybe next year so that I actually get to see some of you. Now I'm going to tell you some stories about Madam Walker. I think that Smithsonian video did half of my speech. And I have to laugh every time I see that particular film because I did that interview, as you could tell, that was me a long time ago with less gray hair and much shorter hair. But the producers somehow didn't pay attention to some things that I was saying because they created a liquid bottle of product and it wasn't liquid, and they put Madam Walker with this really long straight wig, which wasn't the way her hair looked. But they were trying to tell this story of who she was and how she started her company. So I'm going to try to share screen. I feel your pain, Dr. Walker, like when you're making this transition. So let's see if I can make this happen. And there, let me pick the right thing. And then, okay, did this happen? Did it happen? Share. Okay, did it happen? Can you see?
Yes.
Yay! Relief. But I love telling Madam Walker's story, and I had the opportunity to speak with 3 classes today, and I tried not to tell all my stories. Each class was different, and it was really interesting to be able to talk, for me, to be able to talk about law and to focus on what law and ethics meant as Madam Walker was developing her business, what her marketing plans were, what her philanthropy was. And so I'm going to tell a couple of the stories that I told earlier today, but I'm going to really expand on it. So you got from the Smithsonian video, just a sort of basic, Madam Walker was born on the same plantation where her parents and older siblings had been enslaved. So you see that cabin at the top of this picture, that's where she was born. And by the time she died in 1919 at age 51, she was a millionaire living in a mansion on the Hudson River, not too far away from Jay Gould's mansion and a few miles away from John D. Rockefeller's mansion. Along the way, she had this amazing arc from destitution to success. She was orphaned at 7. Both of her parents died. And so she was left in the care of an older sister named Lavinia. And when she gave speeches, Madam Walker was very conscious of her own personal narrative. I think we see that with a lot of entrepreneurs now. Their backstory is important to talking about who they are. And she would tell this story that she said, I got married at 14 to get a home of my own to escape the treatment of my cruel brother-in-law. She married a man named Moses McWilliams, and they had one child, Lelia, who I'm named after, when she was 17. But when Sarah Breedlove McWilliams was only 20 years old, her husband Moses died. So now she is left alone in this early part of her life. She has faced more loss and destitution and difficulty than most people experience in a lifetime. And she had very little opportunity for education. Part of the cruelty of her brother-in-law is that he didn't want her to go to school, but really in rural Louisiana during that period of time, during Reconstruction, there really were no schools for Black children. The state legislature would not pay for it, but she had had a taste of, some aspirations even during that period of her life, because where she had grown up in Delta, Louisiana, in a parish on the Mississippi River, which was one of the wealthiest communities in America at the time, because it was a cotton growing place. And those of you who've done some research on what America's wealth was right before the Civil War, it was in enslaved people who were assets and in cotton. This wealthy community was 90% Black because there were so many enslaved people who were needed to harvest and plant the cotton. And after the Civil War, when Black men got the right to vote, it meant that there was now Black political power. So this is what part of Reconstruction was. And her family minister, Curtis Pollard, was elected to the state Senate. He was a state senator. He was a businessman. He had a small store. He also operated a ferry. So she was seeing the beginnings of the opportunities that were being created once African Americans were freed, that people were starting businesses, they were becoming very involved in politics and getting political power. But that political power was halted. The Ku Klux Klan, big backlash after the election of 1876, the Confederates decided that they wanted to retake power. And so there was a lot of political violence during that election of 1876. A lot of people were lynched and people were intimidated at the voting booth. And so they took away the power that would naturally have come with African Americans being able to vote. So now her brothers and her family minister were chased out of Louisiana. They had become very discouraged because every year at the end of this planting season, when people were going to get paid for all of the cotton they had grown as sharecroppers, somehow there was never a profit for them. And in 1879 and 1880, there were a couple of preachers who came through the parishes of Louisiana on the Mississippi and the counties of Mississippi along the Mississippi River. And they told people there's land in Kansas and there's land in Nebraska. And just as we have seen people migrating from Central America, these were people in Mississippi and Louisiana who were looking for opportunity and looking to escape the violence and the lynching. And so people just lined up on the banks of the Mississippi River and started going north. And Madam Walker, Sarah Breedlove's minister, Curtis Pollard, was one of the people advocating for this migration. But some of the politicians, the white politicians in Delta, Louisiana, resented him trying to be an independent person. And they chased him out of Louisiana at gunpoint. Her brothers, her older brothers, followed along, and they took a boat up the Mississippi River on a steamboat and got off the boat at St. Louis. Curtis Pollard continued on to Kansas, but Sarah Breedlove's brothers stayed in St. Louis. So after her husband, Moses McWilliams, died in 1888, Sarah knew she couldn't go back to live with her sister and brother-in-law. So she took a boat, to St. Louis with her little girl, hoping that she would be able to spend time with her brothers, hoping that they would help her get on her feet. Her brothers had become barbers. And this was a time, again, Black men trying to have businesses. They had, as barbers, they actually dominated the barbering trade. And this was kind of a holdover in many ways from slavery, when Black men had been the groomsmen. They had shaved their, the owners and white men. And so now they were the, sort of servants who did that, but they had turned that service industry into a business. Some Black men became quite wealthy. Alonzo Herndon in Atlanta, Mr. Merritt in North Carolina, both founded insurance companies, but her brothers were not wealthy or prosperous in that way. But fortunately for Sarah, their barbershop was very near St. Paul African Methodist Episcopal Church. And if you don't know about the history of the AME Church, I encourage you to Google it or go to the library and learn something about it, because it really is a fascinating history, again, of this sort of generation coming out of slavery, when people have great aspirations for their families, for themselves, for ownership of land, for starting businesses. And the AME Church, even during slavery, when it was illegal to teach enslaved people to read and write, they were having secret schools, underground schools. Many of their churches were churches that were part of the Underground Railroad. And they also had a relatively educated leadership with missionary societies in Africa and the Caribbean. But it was really the women of the church who began to give Sarah Breedlove a vision of herself as something other than an illiterate washerwoman. She was in the missionary society. Maybe she could only contribute a penny a week, but she was starting to have these seeds planted of giving back to her community. She also had a good enough singing voice that she was in the choir, so she could spend time traveling with the choir in different churches around the city. And she was beginning to have role models. She was modeling herself after some of these more successful women. So she was following along, struggling. She married a man named John Davis. It was a horrible marriage. And she had to leave him, and so much stress and really poor diet and poor hygiene, as the Smithsonian film was saying, meant that she was losing her hair. When people didn't wash their hair very often, they would have horrible dandruff, horrible scalp infections. And so Sarah started losing her hair. And she said, I was so ashamed of my frightful appearance that I prayed to the Lord for a solution. And one night in a dream, she said, a big African man appeared and told me what to mix up for my formula. Some of the ingredients came from Africa. I sent for them. I mixed them together. I applied them to my scalp, and my hair began to grow back faster than it had ever fallen out. So I have to tell you, I think that's part of the truth. There, in fact, were a few products already on the market. Even Cuticure, you've heard of that, had been around for a long time. The formula that was basically a shampoo that cleansed your scalp, and then an ointment like Vaseline petrolatum that included sulfur, which was a medicinal agent, applied to a clean scalp, meant it healed the infections and it healed the dandruff. So this was her great revelation at a time when aspirin and penicillin really were not commonly used. Medicine was much more primitive. But Sarah began to develop this product. She moved from St. Louis, where for a while she sold the products that were being manufactured by a woman who would become her major competitor, Annie Malone, moved to Denver. And when she was in Denver, she's still selling Malone's hair care products, taking some of the lessons she learned from her brothers who were barbers. And she was also working as a cook, and as her main job really, for a pharmacist in Denver, the largest pharmacy west of the Mississippi. And the pharmacist saw what she was doing, and he said, this is just a really basic formula, and I can help you mix up some things. You can add other things. You can change whatever you like, and you can sell your own product. You do not have to buy from somebody else. And it was a product that he was very familiar with. The formula was very familiar. So after she got to Denver, where she had a widowed sister-in-law and 4 nieces who could help out. By now, she sent her daughter to school in Knoxville College, which was a big deal. Her good friend, Charles Joseph Walker,
who was a newspaper man and knew something about advertising, moved to Denver. They got married, and she began to call herself Madam C.J. Walker. Just a little bit of an affectation, but Paris was the center of fashion and beauty even then. And so women who were in cosmetics and in fashion, who were seamstresses or who had businesses, often called themselves Madam. So she wanted to have a little cachet, make herself a little fancier. She and CJ traveled around to Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, places where there were more Black customers than there were in Colorado. Her daughter moved to Denver briefly to help run the business and to mix up the supplies to ship to her. They then settled briefly in Pittsburgh for about a year and a half, but she moved to Indianapolis in 1910. And you see her here driving her Model T with her niece next to her in the front seat, the manager of her factory, Alice Kelly, sitting behind her. Alice Kelly had been the dean of girls at a Black boarding school in Kentucky called Eckstein Norton. And seated next to Miss Kelly was her bookkeeper, Lucy Flynn, who was from Louisville. So the Madam Walker had a Kentucky connection, women who were working with her in her company. And shortly after she arrived in Indianapolis, there was a big campaign to build a new YMCA. And the YMCAs at that point were segregated, racially segregated. So there was a white YMCA and a Black YMCA. The white YMCA had just had a new fabulous building, a $250,000 building, which was a lot of money at the time. And they had a swimming pool and a state-of-the-art everything and meeting rooms and just a lovely, lovely facility. But the Black YMCA was in a really rickety old building. There weren't enough meeting rooms. The shower facilities were in a coal shed across the alley. And the basketball floor, and I say this to folks in Kentucky who love basketball, the basketball floor was under regulation size. In fact, it was so small that they had to reduce the number of players from 5 to 3. So, this was a big problem and they clearly needed a new facility. Around this same time, a man named Jesse Moreland, who was the first Black international secretary of the YMCA, had persuaded Julius Rosenwald, who was the president of Sears Roebuck in Chicago and a real supporter of Booker T. Washington and other causes. Moreland had persuaded Julius Rosenwald to pledge $25,000 to any city in America where the Black and white communities would work together, doing that collaboration, Trevor, to raise the balance of $75,000 to build a $100,000 building. So Jesse Moreland came to town, as he had done in many other cities. He pulled together the leadership of both Ys and other people in the community, businessmen, to make sure that they were supporting this effort. And during this big rally, some of the white businessmen stood up and they pledged $1,000, $5,000, $10,000, because they wanted to make sure that there was a facility for these young Black men so that they could have all of the values that were important for success in life. To everyone's astonishment, Madam C.J. Walker stood up during the rally and she said, I pledge $1,000 to the building fund of the YMCA because I want to help our boys. And I believe if I help our boys, it will help our girls. And that is what I am interested in. Of course, she wanted to help the boys, but she knew nothing was being done for the girls. She was trying to help create community. Well, people were stunned. No Black woman had ever given that amount of money for that kind of cause, that kind of secular cause. And now people wanted to hear her as she traveled around the country doing speeches. Her crowds got larger and larger because she was being written about in Black newspapers all over the country and in some white newspapers as well, because it was a pretty astonishing gift. How had this woman, who had been a washerwoman until she was 38 years old, been able to transform herself into a person who could pledge this amount of money? And so she decided that as she shared this story, she really wanted to share it to a larger audience, to talk to other businessmen and women, to tell them how she had been able to accomplish this feat. And so she decided that she would visit the National Negro Business League Convention, a group that was founded by Booker T. Washington, who you see here in the center of this picture holding the white hat. Booker T. Washington had founded this organization in 1900, and he at the time was the most powerful African-American man in the country. He wielded tons of power over Black newspapers. He was developing Tuskegee Institute, his school in Alabama. He was invited to the White House by Theodore Roosevelt. So he was somebody who Madam Walker respected. She didn't agree with him on all of his politics, but she very much wanted his endorsement. She had met him before. She had even gone to Tuskegee, but he was really keeping her at arm's length. She wasn't part of his inner circle. So you know when somebody is not totally giving you their respect, but you still may want to try to persuade them. So she was in that mode with him. She arrived at the convention in Chicago during the summer of 1912, and he knew who she was, absolutely. People knew about this $1,000 donation. They knew she was building her business. They knew she had built a factory. And as she arrived in her chauffeur-driven car, so she could not be missed, she sent word to Washington that she wished to be included on the program. And if you've done panels, you've done conventions, you know that speaking list of speakers is already planned weeks and maybe months in advance. And so she was not officially on the program, but she thought her story was so important that they could make time for at least a few minutes to hear her story. But Booker T. Washington ignored that request. On the second day of the convention, her good friend George Knox, who you see here to the left in the camel's hair coat and the large hat, he stood up, and he and Washington were colleagues, and he was on the board, and he said, "We should hear from Madam C.J. Walker. She is from my hometown of Indianapolis, and she is the woman who contributed $1,000 to the building fund of the YMCA. She has an incredible story to tell." And even though Washington knew Knox and he knew that what he was saying was true, he dismissed that. And he said, we're discussing lifetime membership. And then he proceeded to call upon somebody who was not discussing lifetime membership. In fact, to add insult to injury, he called upon one of Madam Walker's neighbors from Indianapolis. So you can imagine just how she felt. She knew that he was disrespecting her. And she knew that while Mr. Saunders was a very successful businessman, that her company was larger. He had developed a uniform manufacturing company that made uniforms for people who worked in service, who worked in hotels, who worked in hospitals, who were servants. And he had been a bellman in a hotel in Indianapolis. His wife was a seamstress. They had combined their talents to develop this business that was now a regional business with customers in Indiana and the 4 surrounding states. At this point, just 6 years after Madam Walker had founded her company, she was selling products all over the United States, as well as the Caribbean and Central America. Mr. Saunders, it turns out, had been the treasurer of the fundraising campaign for the YMCA. He had contributed $250, which was a very generous sum. But Madam Walker had contributed 4 times as much, $1,000. Now, she was a good church-going woman, and I know that she knew you were not supposed to look in that collection basket as it went by and compare your gifts to others. However, I can't help but imagine that she felt at least a twinge of resentment. But she maintained her pride and dignity, and on the 3rd and final day of the conference, she stood at her seat, looked toward Booker T. Washington at the podium and said, "Surely you are not going to shut the door in my face. I am a woman who came from the cotton fields of the South. From there, I was promoted to the wash tub. From there, I was promoted to the kitchen. And from there, I promoted myself. I promoted myself into the business of manufacturing hair goods and preparations. And I have built my own factory on my own ground." The next year, he invited her back as a keynote speaker. And here you see them together at the dedication of the YMCA in 1913. Madam Walker sent her chauffeur to the train station to pick up Booker T. Washington. When his train came in, he was a guest in her home. And of course, he had great things to say about her. When he died in 1915, they had developed a mutual respect for each other. Madam Walker really started out with a product. The reason that she had been able to give the $1,000 is because of the success of her wonderful hair grower. And she traveled around, she was training women, showing them that her product really did work. And you can see this before and after. She advertised extensively in the Black press. And in some ways, kind of like a Jenny Craig commercial, she took out ads in newspapers, and she would take testimonial letters from people who were buying her products and who were selling her products. They were saying to her, your product really works. My hair has grown long enough that I can throw away my wig because it is so effective. But more important to her, I think, even than being able to solve this problem, was giving economic opportunity to Black women who had very limited choices when they needed to work, when they wanted to help support their families. You know, it really was a time, obviously, before women had the right to vote. We're just now celebrating the centennial anniversary of women's right to vote in the 19th Amendment. But in 1906, and during that first decade when she was developing her business, 90% of African Americans lived in the South, most in the rural South. Many were sharecroppers, not really able, just subsistence living, not that far really from what their lives had been like during slavery. And if they moved to the cities, as increasingly a number of people were, then they would work as washerwomen, doing other people's laundry, as maids, as cooks, scrubbing people's floors, but not really being able to make a living wage so that they could get ahead. And she was trying to provide jobs for women. So the one woman said to her, you've made it possible for a Black woman to make more money in a day than she could in a month working in somebody's kitchen. So this idea of financial literacy, economic independence was very important to her. She developed a system of beauty culture and taught women this Walker system. She traveled throughout the United States, the Caribbean, and Central America. She traveled there in 1913. She established beauty schools. She had mail order courses. So women now could have a credential that allowed them to have their own businesses. She really wanted to take this globally. And so, as I say, she went to Central America and the Caribbean. She was even wanted very much to travel to Europe to be able to develop the products, but she wanted women to be able to see beyond their immediate circumstances. Key to her success was building a strong leadership team. These are Madam Walker's employees in front of her factory in Indianapolis, the factory that she was referring to when she was giving her speech at the National Negro Business League. She hired a really excellent attorney, F.B. Ransom, who she called her general manager, but today we would think of him, he would be general counsel and the CFO and the CTO and the CIO. He really performed a lot of duties that allowed her to be on the road and to be the visionary. And so entrepreneurs, as we know, have many, many ideas. They have more ideas than they can actually manage. And there's got to be somebody who crosses the T's and dots the I's. And he served that purpose, along with Alice Kelly, the woman you saw in her Model T, who was the manager of the factory, her bookkeeper, the other people who kept the business running day to day. In the beauty schools, once people graduated from the beauty schools, they could own beauty shops, often in Black neighborhoods throughout the United States. And, you know, in cities, the cities were still quite segregated, but there was usually a Black business district. So I know the course you will be talking about is Black Wall Street in Tulsa, but those kinds of business districts were duplicated in many cities across the country because Black business people were creating opportunities. They were creating services that were directed at their community because they were not welcome in other spaces. So women could graduate, get a diploma from the Walker Beauty Schools, open a beauty shop, but they also could work in their homes. Many, just as we are observing now, people are at home and they're trying to create home-based businesses. So that was a better alternative for women who wanted to be able to raise their children, who wanted to be able to be at home and to make money. As Madam Walker traveled, she was developing local and state organizations of her beauty agents. And in 1917, she held her first convention of her sales agents in Philadelphia. You see her here in the middle. To the left is F.B. Ransom, her attorney. To the right is Alice Kelly, the manager of her factory. And at this convention, which was 2 years before Mary Kay was born, you know, Mary Kay with the big pink Cadillacs and, you know, her famous cosmetics company. And Mary Kay is known for giving away Cadillacs and giving prizes to her agents who sell the most products. Madam Walker gave prizes to the agents who sold the most products, but she also gave prizes to the women whose clubs had given the most to charity and who had been politically active in their communities. So she saw these women not just making money for themselves, but as women who were making a difference in their community. For her keynote speech, she said, "I want you to know that your first duty as Walker agents is to humanity. I want others to look at us and realize that we care not just about ourselves, but about others." At the end of the convention, the women sent a telegram to President Woodrow Wilson, urging him to support legislation to make lynching a federal crime. And you see, lynching is still not a federal crime more than 100 years later, which is stunning to me. But the same kinds of issues that African Americans were experiencing during that period of time when the people were being brutalized and when they were being killed for no reason and for made up reasons. There had just been a riot in East St. Louis where more than 36 African Americans had just been killed in their homes and on the streets, similar to what happened in Tulsa. But Madam Walker was really forceful about speaking out. She became friends with Ida B. Wells, who is well known as being a leader in the anti-lynching movement. And Madam Walker and Ida B. Wells, in fact, were such close friends. They were at rallies together. They were speaking out for the rights of Black soldiers during World War I, and they were speaking out against lynching. And I will say to you that they were spied upon by a Black spy and accused of sedition, going against the government, when really all they were doing was speaking out for civil rights for African Americans. And in fact, they were in a classified report, which I found at the National Archives. They were called Negro subversives, meaning that they were militant, and which made me love Madam Walker even more, because I was glad that she was a successful businesswoman. I'm glad that she is a philanthropist and a patron of the arts, but I love that she was politically outspoken and making sure that she was speaking up for civil rights, even during then. In 1913, her daughter persuaded her that in addition to their Indianapolis operation, they needed to have a presence in Harlem, when Harlem was becoming the Mecca for Black culture and politics. And they bought this building. It was actually 2 buildings, and they combined it, redesigned by Vertner Tandy, who was born in Kentucky, and who went to Cornell and Tuskegee and became the first licensed Black architect in New York. He designed this home, which had the beauty salon on the first floor, a very fancy place, the beauty school in the basement, and then their living quarters. It later became the home for A'Lelia Walker's cultural salon during the Harlem Renaissance, called the Dark Tower. That was something, an iconic place. If you've studied anything about the Harlem Renaissance, you've read about her Dark Tower. And then Vertner Tandy, with his Kentucky roots, designed this mansion for Madam Walker in Irvington, New York, the wealthiest community in America at the time. She wanted to make a statement about the progress that African Americans were able to make in just 1 generation out of slavery. Jay Gould lived about a half a mile away, and John D. Rockefeller lived about 5 miles away. It is today a National Historic Landmark and is a convening place for the New Voices Fund, which is a venture capital fund supporting women of color entrepreneurs. This is the Madam Walker Legacy Center in Indianapolis. It also is a National Historic Landmark. So for those of you who've been to Indianapolis, it's right across the street from IUPUI's campus. So, I love to hear questions from students. And before we go to questions, I just want to say to you that Madam Walker would say that people often asked her the secret to her success. And she would say to them, there is no royal, flower-strewn path to success. And if there is, I have not found it. For whatever success I have attained has been the result of much hard work and many sleepless nights. I got my start by giving myself a start. So don't sit down and wait for the opportunities to come. You have to get up and make them for yourself. Thank you.
Thank you so much, A'Lelia. As you unshare your screen, folks, just as a matter of context, she's been with us all day, and we will be done on time tonight by 7:30. We started at 9:30 this morning. We are going to try to answer all the questions we can, and I will make sure that any questions that she does not cover get sent to her, and we will follow up with you via email. I do also want to say this. Earlier, I asked you about how in this popular culture, the Netflix series brought Madam C.J. Walker to an entirely new audience, which is great. However, many people may fail to understand your editorial, or maybe lack thereof, control, discretion in the production of a Hollywood fictionalized account of your great-great-grandmother. So if you don't mind leading with that to set the tone, because we have a lot of people from St. Louis who are tuning in and engaged with this conversation. We appreciate this STO crew. Could you maybe lead with that, and then I'll turn it back over to our ladies who are going to moderate, please?
Sure, absolutely. So, clearly Self-Made was a fictionalized version. Although my book, On Her Own Ground, was optioned as the sort of inspiration for the story, I did not control the script. And I actually objected to the way that Annie Malone from St. Louis was portrayed. Because in On Her Own Ground, which I wrote, which came out in 2001, I did a lot of the scholarship, a lot of the research on Annie Malone that other people had not done. So I really tried to tell Annie Malone's story honestly in On Her Own Ground. And there are a number of Malone scholars who use my book and who cite my book because it is historically accurate. I'm a big stickler on facts. And what the story that I told was Annie Malone and Madam Walker were both very successful businesswomen. They were both very good philanthropists. Madam Walker, I think, is more well known. She died at the height of her fame. And there are a lot of other decisions that they made with their companies about their executive leadership team that made a difference in how they are remembered. But my telling of the story about Annie Malone is one that I think is accurate, and it was not what was reflected in Self-Made. The writer, the head writer, and the showrunners for Self-Made wanted to create conflict. So they made up this conflict over skin color between the two women. They made it seem as if Annie Malone was trolling Madam Walker. That is not what really happened. So I do not take any responsibility for the inaccuracies. But what I will say about Self-Made is that I thought Octavia Spencer was great. I thought every time she came on the screen, I could feel the strength and the persistence and the spirit of Madam Walker. And I appreciated that. She was lovely. I love the wigs. I thought the wigs were really done well, unlike that Smithsonian film where they didn't really understand what Black women's hair was about. But Octavia's hairdresser, beautician, had done the hair, much of the hair. And then there was another beautician who did a lot of the hair for the character. So that I thought was well done. I was really glad to see prosperous Black people during the early 20th century. I think a lot of people have no idea that there were prosperous or wealthy Black people. We've been stereotyped so much as sort of not having any wealth, not having any education, that it was really important to see that first generation out of slavery, starting businesses, being at conventions. I didn't like the way that Booker T. Washington was portrayed. As you could tell from the story that I tell about him, that was not really what their relationship was like. It made it seem like he was much more of a sexist than he really was, and that he, sort of really put her down, and that they had their relationship had an arc. I would have loved to have seen more about her philanthropy and her political activism. But bottom line for me is that I think something like 30 million people saw it. Madam Walker is really popular now in Brazil. There are many people like you, Patrick, who found me as a result of that. And I am able to tell the story and hope that people will, buy the book or read the book or listen to the audio book, and that more people will want to know the facts of her life.
And there is so much opportunity, more than enough room to celebrate every successful person of color during that era. And I know we talked about that. I'm sure you have many future plans, but I want to turn it back over to our ladies who will field the questions.
Hi, yeah, so I'll start off our questions. Thank you again for speaking with us and sharing Madam C.J. Walker's story. It is definitely very inspiring, especially for young women such as myself. We do have a question from the audience. So you talked a lot about Madam C.J. Walker's journey herself, but what made you decide to continue her legacy?
Well, so in my family, my mother was vice president of the Madam C.J. Walker Manufacturing Company when I was growing up. And I saw my mother as a businesswoman. My father was president of another Black hair care company called Summit Laboratories. So technically, my parents were competitors, but not really, because by the late 1950s and the 1960s, when I was growing up, the Walker Company, which had been a major company like Poro, Annie Malone's company, and Sarah Spencer Washington's Apex, really was no longer a major company. My father's company was more successful, but both of my parents were hair care industry executives. But my real passion was writing. And my parents encouraged me to follow my own passion, my own dreams. I did that. I worked for 30 years and at ABC and NBC combined. And but on the side, I had started to tell Madam Walker's story when I was in graduate school at Columbia in journalism. My advisor insisted that I write about the members of my family. That was the last thing on my mind. But many, many years later, it turns out that has become the passion. But I think I care about it more. I'm able to tell it more because I spent time doing something, developing my own talents, my own career, and now I can tell Madam Walker's story. And what I began to see is that during a period of time when so few stories about women of color, about African-American women that we were not learning in our American history classes, the full story of American history about the wide diversity and all of the contributions in America. And so I every day wake up wanting to make sure that I'm filling in the blanks of that history. I will just tell you one other thing. This is different from Madam Walker, but I didn't really like history when I was in high school because I didn't see myself in the history books. And the one time I remember Black people being mentioned in my American history class when I was a junior in high school was Black people as slaves. And it even said, and I found the textbook a few years ago, it said that they were contented. Now, I knew this was not true, but I was the only Black kid in the class, and there wasn't anybody who could refute that. But I later learned that my own family members had been free people of color, had gotten out of slavery, had their free papers, and that two of my great-great-grandfathers had been in the Continental Army during the Revolutionary War. So the story of who we are as African Americans is so different from what most of us learned in high school. And so, as I say, I wake up every morning wanting to fill in the blanks and tell the full story of American history.
I definitely understand that, being a history major, so I appreciate that. Wanting to tell the whole story, that's definitely something I see as important for people.
It's a lifetime, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's a lot, but knowing the full story just it gives you a better understanding, especially of the people that came before us. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we have another question from the audience. They're wanting to know, how do you suggest women entrepreneurs develop a strong leadership team as Madam C.J. Walker had?
So I think one of the things Madam Walker did, because she herself had been mentored by other women, she understood the importance of really identifying talent. And when she would travel around, she would make a speech to a big audience, and then a smaller group of women would come together, and she would demonstrate her products, and she would recruit them as sales agents. But while she was talking, she would see who asked the best questions, who showed leadership skills, who did the other women gravitate to, who had some charisma. And she could see that those were people who were born leaders. And those were the people she would put in leadership positions. So I think that's very important. I think if somebody is interested in entrepreneurship, one of the things, there are two things that I particularly love that can help carry on Madam Walker's legacy. One is actually called Walker's Legacy. You can, I think it's walkerslegacy.com. It's an organization that's in many cities, and online learning that talks about being an entrepreneur and gives courses and lectures and creates a community. The other is the New Voices Fund. And the New Voices Fund was created by Richelieu Dennis, whose company Sundial Brands manufactures the Madam Walker line of hair care products, as well as Shea Moisture and Nubian Heritage. And after Rich sold Sundial Brands to Unilever, he still is involved, but after he sold it to Unilever, he took some of the proceeds from that sale and bought Essence and Essence Festival and created this venture capital fund for women of color entrepreneurs. And New Voices Fund also offers online classes and training. I just watched a business competition this weekend where they gave away $100,000 to 7 women of color entrepreneurs. So there's so much online now where you can learn about it, you can be in touch with people, you can network with people. But finding the leadership, it's like you have to have a knack for identifying leadership qualities in others, and giving people a chance to make mistakes, but then giving them a chance to succeed.
Thank you.
Hi, we have another question. Someone wants to know about how Miss Walker went about making the other batches of her hair care products. She knows the first batch came from a dream, but after that, did she research into hair care? Did she go to school? Did she just stick to like what was working for her, or how did that process go?
Yeah, well, I think the dream part is probably partially true. I mean, I don't doubt that she had a dream. Even Einstein said that part of the theory of relativity came to him in a dream. But there were products that were already on the market. As I said, the pharmacist, I think, helped her mix some things up. Cuticure was very similar. There were other Black-owned companies long before Madam Walker or Annie Malone who were making similar products. So there were other things for her to try to experiment with. So it really is a formula that has been around really centuries before. It's in old medical textbooks and old pharmaceutical formulas. But one thing that we have to get our minds around now, we walk into the CVS or the local drugstore and you see dozens of choices of hair gels and shampoos and all kinds of things. But during that period of time, there weren't really a lot of commercially available, nationally distributed products. So the market was very different. You think about names like Helena Rubinstein, Elizabeth Arden, those names may not be that familiar to you, but those were the sort of the early cosmetics mavens. And cosmetics were considered only for fast women at that point. Women who were upstanding women didn't wear lipstick. So that market had to be developed by women. The same thing with hair care products for Black women. They were developing that market. And so at that point, it was really a very small, products might have been made locally, they maybe were distributed regionally, but to develop a company that was a national and international company, that was something that was new.
Thank you.
So just another question. So Madam C.J. Walker, she certainly paved the way for women entrepreneurs with the mindset of giving back to the community. How do you see that represented today? Are there any prominent like women entrepreneurs that you can like relate back to her, that remind you of her, or like that you see pushing forth this idea of not only empowering women, but also giving back to their community?
Absolutely. You know, I think probably Oprah Winfrey is the, you know, the easiest example to think of. She's built a school in Africa. She gives scholarships to people. She gives opportunities for productions. So I think she certainly is an example of somebody who's doing that. But she, you know, but there are people who are less well known than she is, who are doing that on a daily basis. I'm sure in Lexington, there are women who are doing exactly that. And certainly the New Voices Fund is an example. Sundial Brands was really created on the concept of what's called community commerce, which is a way of philanthropy. But there are a number of the Black sororities are doing that. But I can almost not think of any you know, woman of color who has a business who is not trying to mentor other women, who's not taking a leadership role and trying to set an example. So I think it happens quite a bit because women especially see that they needed somebody to help them succeed, and they want to help and mentor others.
Do you know if there are any Madam C.J. Walker products still manufactured today? And if so, where are they?
Sure. So the MCJW line is manufactured by Sundial Brands, a division of Unilever. The products have been in Sephora for the last few years, but we are getting ready to make a new transition. So I can't tell you the details about it, but just keep your eyes open. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram, and we'll be making some announcements in about 60 days, but the products are still available. It's very interesting for me that the company never went out of business. My family was directly involved through the 1980s, along with the family of Madam Walker's attorney, F.B. Ransom. The trademark was sold to another company in the 80s. The trademark was owned by that other company for about 30 years, but they really did not fully develop it. And then Rich Dennis, the founder of Sundial Brands, bought the trademark and has relaunched the product. So we're very excited that we're able to say that there are products.
I think we have another question that is asking about women's rights. So obviously at this time when Madam C.J. Walker was coming into business, women had little to no rights at all, and that's almost impossible for us to imagine. But for you growing up, how have you seen women's rights change, and like women in business and CEO positions change, and are those very noticeable, and how have those affected you?
You know, that's a great question, because I did graduate from college in 1974. And this is hard for you to believe, but at that point, it was very rare that a woman would have a credit card in her own name. You had to have the credit card in the name of your husband. Well, if you didn't have a husband, what were you supposed to do? I guess your father. But there was legislation. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was very instrumental in opening those doors for women. Lindy Boggs, you have heard of Cokie Roberts, who was the journalist who died last year. Cokie and I were colleagues at ABC, but her mother, Lindy Boggs, is when she was in Congress after Cokie's father died, Lindy Boggs just kind of sweetly inserted women's credit into some legislation. And she said to the male members of Congress, I'm sure it was just an oversight. And that helped women get credit cards. It was also true that during that period of time, that women, when I became a producer at NBC in 1976, when I graduated from Columbia, women would get hired at the networks, at the television networks, as researchers and secretaries, and they would remain researchers and secretaries. And young men would be hired as desk assistants and associate producers. And then they would move up the ranks to become producers and senior producers and executive producers. But right around the time when I joined, women had sued NBC and Newsweek. And so because they were being discriminated against, there also had been the Kerner Commission after the riots, after Martin Luther King was assassinated, that said there needed to be more Black journalists in the newsrooms. So I don't know if any of you saw on Sunday, the Los Angeles Times, this is really worth reading. The Los Angeles Times kind of gives you a history of their discrimination against people of color. And of course, Los Angeles is quite diverse. But as a result of both of those things, this push for more Black journalists and this push for more women, that opened the doors for me. It made a huge difference in the opportunities that I had.
So how do you think, like, today as a society, like, what can we do to ensure that the next Madam Walker has opportunities to thrive and succeed? Like, what are ways you think we could help rather than hinder?
Well, you know, I love seeing that all of you are working together. You really are modeling what we need to be doing, which is collaborating, which is respecting each other, which is working together. You know, I think when people come together to solve a problem together, when they talk to each other, that makes a huge difference. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not also always somebody over in the corner who doesn't want you to work together. And one of the things that I have learned in my many years on the planet is that people can make progress in getting along, in making the society more open, in providing opportunities. But there is always going to be, unfortunately, a segment of the population who opposes that. And so you just have to be stronger. You just have to keep fighting. The fight is never over.
What is one piece of advice you have for any minority entrepreneurs wanting to get their foot in the door?
You know, I think that, you know, Madam Walker would say first you have to have a great product and then you have to market it. But obviously that is not enough. Getting capital is still an issue. And that's why something like the New Voices Fund is really helpful. Anybody who is on, who wants to be an entrepreneur, I really, really urge you to go to that website. Melissa Bradley, who is the person who really runs the New Voices Fund, has been a professor of business. And, you know, you have Patrick Walker there, you have your other professors, but I think it's really important to network with people to make sure that you are getting support. But we were talking earlier about with Charles, and Charles, I'm not sure how to pronounce your last name, but he was asking me about free enterprise and about wealth creation. And one of the things that is true in who has wealth, you know, I noticed that Reverend William Barber doesn't say low income people, he says low wealth people. And that is very intentional, because how wealth is created in America, people start businesses and they sell businesses and that helps create wealth. But for most Americans, wealth is created by getting an education, by making enough money that you can buy a house, you can have equity in your house, you can pass that equity on to the next generation. And that has been thwarted for generations for a lot of people of color. And that's how people, they get an equity loan from their house to seed the money from their business, or they get it from relatives. That's what happens with a lot of people when they don't have an angel investor who comes in. But just so people understand, and what Charles and I were talking about earlier, when Madam Walker was developing her business and when she was thinking about ways to help her community, she emphasized education and she also emphasized home ownership. She was investing in real estate. She owned some of the best real estate in New York City during her lifetime. She built this mansion in the wealthiest community in America because she knew how important it was to create wealth through the ownership of real estate. But some of those people, some of her sales agents who were able to buy homes in Black communities because communities were segregated in the 19 teens and 20s and 30s, they had homes in Black neighborhoods, but the federal housing policies intentionally did not, it allowed banks not to give loans, allowed banks not to give mortgages in those communities. They did what was called redlining. You've heard of this term, redlining. There's a great book called Color of Law by Richard Rothstein that I recommend that people read, because it will tell you why there is less wealth in the Black community. Because their homes did not appreciate, did not increase in value. This exact same home in a Black neighborhood that was redlined, where the banks did not lend money for home improvements or for mortgages, is worth 1/10 of what the exact same home is in a neighborhood that's predominantly white. So you compound that generation after generation after generation of people not being able to create wealth with the ownership of their homes.
So, Ms. Bundles, as we come to a close, I do want to ask you, have you thought about telling Madam C.J. Walker's story on a much larger scale? I'm thinking big screen, movie production. I'm already thinking Tyler Perry Studios, someone like him. Have you ever thought about that, to where you would?
Sure. I mean, through the years, the various ways that a book gets optioned, I've talked with people about musicals, plays, documentaries. There's actually a really great documentary called $2 and a Dream that you can see on YouTube, that was done by Stanley Nelson, the grandson of F.B. Ransom. Stanley is a very well-known filmmaker, a MacArthur genius. So there's that. But yes, I think it could be a feature film. I actually, as I'm finishing this biography on Madam Walker's daughter, I'm hoping that will be a series, but I will just be much more involved in the telling of the story this time.
Well, earlier, I didn't want the men to be left out. And so I was asking for a friend about Madam C.J. Walker hair care line for men with beards. And so we'll be looking forward to that, so we can be a part of the ecosystem. But we started this conversation with, again, Chuck's and the Institute's intention on showing the intersection between racial inequality and free enterprise systems, where minorities and underrepresented individuals have a chance to compete and to thrive. So I want to give you a chance. We're also dealing with a lot. We're dealing with the global pandemic. We're dealing with still systemic racism. We've all been inspired by both you and your great grandmother. Could you close us out with any words of encouragement or advice as we go on our way?
So thank you so much, everybody, for your patience today, for listening. I mean, it's really a privilege for me to be able to speak with you and to just know that you have so much potential, so much opportunity to change the world. And I know that's what you're doing. I can see the way that you're working together. And it is tough. I mean, these fights are difficult. There are people who will disagree with you and who will tell you that you're being too idealistic. But I think that as you go into the workplace, you will face all kinds of challenges, and there will be people who will, sort of make you want to compromise your principles, but hold fast to those principles and do as Madam Walker said, I got my start by giving myself a start. Don't sit down and wait for the opportunities to come. You have to get up and make them for yourself. And I think that happens no matter where you are, no matter what level you are, that you can diplomatically make a suggestion that something needs to change, that something needs to be better, that you're willing to do the work to make that change. And if you find out that the environment that you're in is unreceptive to your change, then you can go off and do your own thing as Madam Walker did.
Well, A'Lelia, again, you have been a true blessing the entire day. For all our guests who zoomed in, we thank you, because this is a success because of you. We are going to be determined to bring her to the physical campus in Lexington, Kentucky, sometime in the summer or fall. but we want to just bless you all and thank you for your time and give Miss Aaliyah a round of applause. Thank you so much. And everyone have a really good night. And thank you again, everyone. Thank you to our students and to the Falconer staff. We all are a team. Individuals win games, but teams win championships. Y'all be good. Thank you all. Good night, everyone.
Good night.